How many of you are or consider yourself to be stubborn? I do. Yeah, all people also say. You see, I have a certain way that I oftentimes like to look at things. I look at given situations, and I don't like to move. You know, you may not know this about me. My wife knows this very well about me. I get stuck. You know, I have my own way of doing things, and when people suggest maybe to do it a little bit differently, I have a tendency to want to just put those heels in and say, no, and do it my way. But I think I've found, as I've interacted with others, that this is a very common trait. I think all human beings have an innate sense of just stubbornness. You know, when it comes, you may not be all things, but with certain things, you have a certain way of doing it. You have a certain, way of doing things. You have a certain way of looking at things. And when somebody questions that, especially the things that really hit you close to your heart, you dig in those heels and you say, I'm not going to change that or even examine that. And this should help us to understand the power that relationships have in our lives. Relationships have incredible power in our lives. They have the power to change us and move us in ways that nothing else really can a lot of times. I'll give you a simple example. I've never been much of a thrill seeker in my life. I grew up actually kind of a pansy when it came to riding thrill rides, those sorts of things. I still remember at the age of 10, getting made fun of by my grandparents in a joking manner, that since I wouldn't ride the log ride at the amusement park we'd go to every year. And I grew up and I started to spread my wings a little bit, and I still remember, I rode maybe a couple roller coasters, small ones. But then I started dating a girl named Megan, and I found myself being pushed in a new direction in this way, because one of the first times I came to Michigan, I visited her family here, and she's like, let's go to Cedar Point. I'm like, what's Cedar Point? Sure, that sounds like fun. Why not? I'm like, I didn't even know anything about it. And then I go online, I looked that they just had this brand new roller coaster, tallest roller coaster in the world, open, called Millennium Force. And I look at this thing online, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I'm not going to ride on that thing, But but I had this girl who loved me for who I was. I loved her, and I didn't want to disappoint. I didn't want her to think I was a wimp. I was going to make sure we had a good time. So if I remember correctly, I don't think I complained. And we went, and I went on the Millennium Force, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So now, we went to Cedar Point with the youth this last summer, and I absolutely loved it. But there was a time in my life when I was not at all that type of person who enjoys something like that. And I credit my wife largely for moving me to actually consider that. And I think that we can all think of different things in our lives in which relationships have moved us or pushed us. Relationships can drive people to change places where they live, go move to a new state, leave family and friends behind, move to a new country. Relationships can encourage and motivate people to change bad habits, leave addictions behind. I know people who've told me that because of the people in their lives, the family and friends that they love, who love them through it all, that provided them the motivation to leave like drugs, alcohol, other things behind. Relationships can also drive us, to the mountaintops, and also drive us to our knees. It can be great one moment, the next moment you're resentful, angry, and depressed maybe even. Relationships can also cause us to question our core values and even abandon them or take on new ones. I'm guessing that some of you in here might actually be in that pew largely because of a relationship. Somebody you knew, somebody you care for, you love, motivated you to try something out. And now maybe you look at the world in a totally different way. In the same way, there are people I'm sure we all know and love who used to be very active in their faith, but now because they developed a relationship with somebody outside of the faith, they decided that the person that they cared for could give them more than Jesus could, and so they've left their faith behind. So the question is this. I think there's plenty of examples. The question is this: why do relationships move us? Why do they have that power? I think all you have to do is open up the Bible to the first couple chapters of Genesis, and you get a picture. You get a picture, first of all, of a God who created this entire world, including us. He created the stars in the sky, and what did he say? He said it was good. He created everything that would inhabit the world, created the world itself, and what did he say? He said it was good. He created the first human being, Adam, and after he did that, he said it was good. And then what he did next, and you find in Genesis chapter 2, is he puts Adam to work and to take care of creation. God said it's good. But God looks at Adam by himself. And this is the one time before sin came into the world where God looks at everything and he says, it is not good. See, Genesis chapter 2, it is not good for man to be alone. So what did he do? He created a companion. He made the first woman, Eve. And then it was truly good. You almost see relationship as, the moment when the first human relationship was created, that's when everything itself was all good. It speaks really to the foundational nature, not only of marriage, but I would say by extension relationships and the role that they play in our lives. Because you see, I believe deep down in our core and our DNA it's built within us is this desire for relationship. And this is why relationships have such a strong pull in our lives. Relationships go deeper than outward actions. I could sit and reason with you and say, okay, this is what you're doing in your life. You need to change it. Or I could create a bunch of rules, I could create a bunch of guidelines and say, when you come to Shepherd Lakes, this is the way you need to behave. This is exactly the way it is, And it may deter you, it may encourage you to comply, but it's not going to hit you here. You see, that's what relationships do. They penetrate the barriers that we put up. Because in our heart of hearts, we desire to be known on a deep level, and not only to be known, but to be loved after being known. We desire to be needed, for other people to look to us, to trust in us. We want to be wanted. And when you experience that, when somebody offers you that in a relationship, the weight of that, the fulfillment of that deep desire outweighs my need to plant my legs firmly here and not move anywhere. And we all know it's true. Somebody engages you in a relationship and suddenly find yourself moving and doing things you don't even know why sometimes. So I guess if you're tracking me, I guess this is probably, I should backstep a little bit, make sure you're following me through the process and kind of lead into today's reading. Relationships move us, okay? They have the power to move us. They move us because it's built into the fabric of our being, and relationships touch us at the core of who we are, okay? And if that's true, it would probably serve us to be wise in who we develop relationships with, right? So how do we engage in finding healthy relationships? How do we find those relationships that would actually be good for us? I think it's a good idea to take a look at our reading for today to find out a little bit more of that. I'm going to beg your forgiveness because I'm going to have to give a little bit of background so you can track the story. There's a guy named Abraham, and I know we've talked about him in recent weeks quite a bit. God came to Abraham with a promise. He asked him to move away from his extended family, move to a new land, and God promised him that if he would do that the entire world would be blessed through his family, through Abraham's family. And he also promised him that his descendants would inherit that land. Now there was a little bit of a problem with all of that because Abraham was an old man, and his wife, well, she was barren. She couldn't have children. But amazingly, God worked a miracle. God keeps his promises. And so at the age of 100, and his wife Sarah at the age of 90-something probably, they had a child. They named him Isaac. Now that promise that God made to Abraham still held true. And Isaac grew up to be a young man ready to get married, marrying age. And Abraham knew that if God's promise was to be fulfilled, he was going to have to find a wife for his son. How is he going to go about doing that? So what we find in our reading today, which you might have a hard time figuring out, what can we learn from this? What we find is Abraham really working through this process of finding a wife for his son. And so there's really three options that Abraham had. Okay, so let's work through this. Three options that Abraham could have chosen. The first one is to find an unbelieving wife, a pagan, find an attractive pagan. So he lived in this other land away from family, and he could just go to the closest village, find a beautiful wife, bring it to his son, and there we go, we're done. Wipe my hands clean of this situation. You could do that, all right? Option one. That would be easiest. Second option could be to send Isaac away. Send him away to his extended family, the people that he knew. He could find maybe a wife who loved the Lord, but that would mean his son living at a faraway place. The third option, which is really the most radical and crazy, really, if you think about it, would be for Abraham to send one of his servants to his next of kin, send him away, to find a wife, and then to get the family to agree, and I'll get this, to get the woman's family to agree to send her back with him and marry a guy they've never met. That's number one on my list, right? Well, which one did he choose? He went with number 3. And here's why. God's relationship with Abraham, that was the most important relationship that Abraham had. And Abraham's relationship with God drove his decision-making when it came to his son, and very importantly, this whole concept of finding a relationship for Isaac, okay? And God was faithful. Isaac found, or I should say Abraham's servant found a wife for Isaac, Rebekah, and amazingly, her family agreed to let her go back with the servant. And so she comes back, and that's the first time she's ever seen Isaac, and they get married. Now, it's tempting for us to say, well, why didn't you just send Isaac away then? You could have found an attractive pagan, could have sent Isaac away. Why didn't he do these other options? Well, the first one, of course, is if he sent Isaac to the local town and brought a woman back who didn't believe in God, it was very likely that she would pull him away from the promise. Okay? And so that was, for Abraham, that was not an option. The second one, sending Isaac away, remember the land was part of the promise? If he sent Isaac away, once again, Abraham would be rejecting the promise. And so that's why he went with number 3, ultimately. And we might say, well, that's kind of gross. So Isaac married Rebekah, who's his cousin? Ooh, But I think it's important for us to understand here that the Bible's not teaching us that we are to marry our cousins or anything like that, okay? Trust me, it's not. And because we set our sights, especially in these Old Testament readings, a lot of times on these rather different cultural circumstances, we sometimes miss a major point, which is that when we look at Abraham's decision-making process, it's completely foreign to us because we have a tendency to place human relationships first and foremost, central in our lives. Our relationships with human beings typically drive our relationships with others, including God. And so if it was left to us, we would make God a secondary relationship. And if we were Abraham, typically this is what we'd say. We'd say, oh, Isaac needs a wife. Well, let's just send Isaac to the local bar, find an unbeliever, find an attractive woman, because maybe she'll make him happy. That's the most important thing, is that Isaac's happy, right? The other option we could say is, we'll send Isaac away to college, right? And I'll instruct him to find a woman that makes him happy, that we get along with, and then everything will be great. The reason for this is we think that deep down inside ourselves, we trick ourselves. This is how our sinful nature works. We trick ourselves into believing that human beings can fulfill those deep inner longings we have for relationships. We think, if only I found that right person that makes me feel the way I want to feel, then everything would be just fine. How many of you in here have a perfect marriage? She's not here, right? How many of you have never, ever been hurt by family or friends? My family's perfect. They've never hurt me. It's the opposite. I love my family, but they have hurt me in incredibly deep ways before. How many of you are perfect? Me. No, we know this. We know this, and yet we look at one another and we have all these crazy expectations of the human beings in our lives. We expect the significant others in our lives to fulfill every expectation we have. But the problem is this: inevitably, the human beings in our lives fall short. They do not fulfill our expectations at one point or another. Even if you have somebody who truly cares about you and loves you, they're going to fall short eventually. And it can lead to a whole number of different things. It can lead to, resentment, anger. You can find people who are very joyful. Have you ever seen this before? Somebody who's just absolutely joyful, loves life, and they just love living. They're wonderful people, and then you come across them, you find later in life, and you find that they're this angry, resentful person. It's because they've had a relationship with somebody who's just sucked the joy out of life. Somebody who's hurt them repeatedly, over and over and over. And this particularly happens when, if you find yourself being resentful, at least this is me sharing. A lot of times I find myself resentful when I feel like I am giving and giving and giving and giving, and that other person will not give back. You know what that does? In my heart, it makes me resent them. It makes me angry. Because you know what? I have expectations. I've done things for you, and you should do something for me. Wait a minute, isn't that person a sinner too? Am I a sinner? I might be forgetting about that. Second thing could be loneliness. Unfulfilled expectations can lead to loneliness and depression. Depression is an interesting thing because you can find people who are depressed even when they are surrounded by people who love them. It's a feeling of, I've heard it described kind of like as a feeling of loneliness, even as you're surrounded by lots of people sometimes. And I've found people who, seem to be very comfortable in their own skin. People who are very confident in their abilities, finding themselves lonely, feeling abandoned, feeling depressed, because what they find out is even as they might be performing well in the world, they find out that what other people offer still isn't enough. So where do I turn now? I cuddle in my corner, and I feel sorry for myself, because what now? Unfulfilled expectations can also lead to conflicts, especially when it comes to worldviews. I talked about Abraham earlier and how, he had this option of saying, hey, just go to the local town and find some woman who doesn't believe in God and you'll be fine, And I think a lot of times, especially when we engage in relationships, it's an initial feeling that we have when we meet the person that we believe will get us through anything. This person loves me and cares about me, and it's going to get me through anything, until we start to discover that we have different understandings of the word love. We have different understandings of who God is, and therefore the different understandings of what the meaning of life is. Morality, we might have struggles there, and then kids come on board, and what do we teach our children? Are they going to go to church? Are they not? What am I going to teach them? How are we going to join together? And I know that some of you have probably found yourself in that situation. Maybe you're there right now, and it can be a struggle. I'm sure it can be an absolute struggle. And you see, this is exactly why our most important relationship is the one we have with God. It's got to start there. He has to be central. Back to Abraham. Why would God be the most important relationship? Why in the world would we look to him first? Because, you can't see God. It doesn't seem tangible sometimes. That's why we love human relationships, place them at the center so often. Start with Abraham. Why did he operate in the way he did? Why was he willing to take a leap of faith? Why was that relationship with God so important? Well, I would say because God, he tells us what to expect of him, and he always fulfills those expectations. And he did that for Abraham. He said, Abraham, I'm going to bless the entire world through you. I'm going to give you a child. Even at the age of 100, I can do all things. And that's exactly what God did. He gave Abraham a miracle child, Isaac. And Abraham looked at this son that he had to find a wife for, and he's like, God keeps his promises, and his promises are true. Why would I direct him away to a woman who wouldn't believe in God, in God who keeps his promises? Why would I send Isaac away from the promised land? Why would I do that? There's no reason why I would. And you see, it's through Isaac, ultimately, and his marriage to Rebekah, that God keeps his promise to us, through Jesus. God says, you can expect that I will always forgive you and I will always love you. And you can know that because I sent my son to die for you. And where other relationships fall short, where expectations are oftentimes unfulfilled, Jesus looks at you, sees straight into your heart, knows you, and loves you right where you are. Jesus will never abandon you, even as you seek to abandon him. Jesus will never hurt you. In fact, what Jesus says is, he says, hurt me. He allowed us to crucify him. Jesus promises to walk through our side no matter what may come. He promises to be with us, and he shows us what love is. It talks about this in the Bible, that God is love, and we know what love is and how God loves us by looking to Jesus' work on the cross. And you see, it's there. It's there that God's love pours into our hearts, into our broken hearts, and we find all that we've been longing for. And it has an impact on how we look at others. Our relationships, sometimes that may not be as clean and neat and tidy as we'd like them to be. Jesus helps us to answer some of life's difficult questions. Should I date him or her? Well, I would say that question leads to another one. Do they believe in Jesus? And if not, and if you're deep into it, I would say it's important that they are going to start attending worship with you and learn more about God before you pursue things further. Will they ever get it? Will they ever understand? Will they ever get it? Will they ever get me? Well, guess what? Probably the odds are they may not. Because once again, we are broken, we are sinful, okay? And another human being cannot be our Savior. How many times should I forgive him or her? Every single time. How many times has Jesus forgiven you? Every time. Will things ever get better? I'm in this relationship and it's such a struggle. I just want to take the easy way out. Or, I'm in knee deep. What do I do now? Will things ever get better? It just feels like we're just in this cycle that will never end. Well, guess what? Jesus' promise to you is that things will get better one day. By his grace, perhaps sooner than later. But he promises that one day things will get better. If not on this side of heaven, on the other side, when Jesus returns to make all things new. When those relationships that you have that you cherish and love, and you think about those special moments you've shared with somebody else, imagine that. That's just a glimmer of what one day we will all experience through Christ, who didn't just die but rose again. This is the amazing thing about a relationship with God. Jesus pours his love into our hearts, gives us everything we need. And through his love, he has the power to move us in amazing ways and to move us toward people rather than away from them, even people who are hurtful towards us. And Jesus has the power not only to have an impact on us as individuals, but he has the power to enter into a human relationship and redeem it through the power of his love and forgiveness. Love and forgiveness as defined by Christ. I know some of you have experienced that, and it's a beautiful thing. And if you haven't yet, I invite you to take a deeper look into the Bible. Ask some questions and find out what that might look like. Because a relationship with God, with Christ, offers you something that you can find nowhere else. May we never, ever, ever forget that for the sake of Jesus. Amen.